Hello and welcome. So I think I am live. This is going to be a learning experience. So if anyone is watching when you join, if you can let me know how I sound, and we'll go from there. So yeah, I wanted to currently do this live stream to just test it out, showcase off my knowledge development system, and show you how I work through notes, how I work through my books, how I create notes, anything really, and provide people an opportunity to ask questions for what my system looks like. So that is kind of the idea behind this stream. We'll see how it goes, if it's something that people enjoy, and we'll take it from there. So I had in mind what I could start out with is I recently read a book on the forgetting machine, and I was going to work through some of the highlights that I took from this book. Excellent, thank you, Pansy. That's great that I managed to get it set up well the first go around here. And so I actually have a couple different camera setups here. So I have where you can see my screen, and I also have one where you can see my note cards as well. So if I switch over to write out some analog note cards or look through my slip box, then you'll be able to see what I'm doing there. So I'll just start off by looking at the forgetting machine. This was a book that I read here about memory and perception. And one of the videos that I'm going to be releasing soon is how I approach reading a book, taking notes. I create these little index cards here where I put my goal for reading the book, and then I can also write down some jot notes with a page reference for what I found interesting. So this was what I got out of this book, and then I came over to Logseq and I transferred all of my highlights here to kind of start processing them. So typically then what I do is I will look at each highlight and I'll think about where do I, or when do I want to find this information again? What do I think it's going to be useful for? What part of my slip box do I think this could fit into? So this one here that I already started taking a look at was an idea that when you bring a memory to mind, it changes the memory. So when I was thinking about with an external mind, you don't have to worry about it necessarily degrading or changing from its original idea over time, because you're kind of immortalizing it into an external system. So that's where I wanted to be able to find this, again, is when I'm thinking about the benefits of an external mind versus if I was just thinking about what this is related to. I might have said something like memory and how the plasticity of memory, it's not 100% fixed in stone. So I'm trying to think about when do I want to find this, not what is the idea necessarily about. Those could be two different things sometimes. So then I'll just kind of go through the rest of these notes and add these index tags to them. If I feel like expanding on something, an idea strikes, I might add a little bit more context. Some I might not add anything to, and some will just have the index notes. So if you have any questions or also want to see anything with my system, feel free to ask in the chat, and I can just show you whatever you want to see. So here we extract meaning by unconsciously selecting a minimum of information. This was an interesting idea in the book about how, like, what we see when we remember it, when we're encoding that information in our minds, we actually select very little amount of information, and we extrapolate the meaning behind that idea versus just trying to remember all the little bits and bobs of information. So I was thinking about that in terms of my external mind or Zettelkasten system or some sort of knowledge development system. Is I think necessarily what you want to get to is not where you're just capturing a whole bunch of information in your system. What you're trying to get down to is what are the principles, the meaning behind those ideas, and then that's what you try to kind of codify in your biological brain, is those very discrete, fundamental units of thought. And your external mind can hold all that other information, but you want to use that as a means of getting those principles, that meaning, into your mind so that you can use it. I mean, you're not always going to have your external mind right next to you when you're in a conversation with your coworkers, when you're doing something at work, when you're out and around. You want to be able to use those fundamental principles rather than just pulling up a bunch of information that you don't know how to use. So this one then is, I think, what could this index note be related to? I can go over to my index and I can take a look at some of the different index notes that I have for my external mind and see if any relate to this, or I can just come up with one that I think is appropriate. So this is really, I think, has to do with the purpose of an external mind. It doesn't look like I have a index note for that. So if I create a new index note, what I'll do is come over to here and I will add in a new one. Properties, principles, phases, no. Output of, I mean, that could be, instead of purpose of, output of, so maybe I'll just change this to output of. And then I'll get rid of this one. And then I can add a few notes to myself. All right, a few comments. Is it just me, or is the chat not available on computer? Is there a way? Do I have to make chat visible? Maybe that. Let me know if you can now see chat. From one of your earlier videos, I was wondering, are you from the Netherlands? No, I am from Newfoundland, which is a province in Canada. Ed, what's the advantage of reading a printed book and taking notes on card rather than reading on Kindle and importing your highlights? So I currently do both. I've been experimenting with the Kindle. That's typically what I would read, but I've been experimenting with the physical book. A couple reasons why is when I'm doing inspectional reading, which is what my next video is going to be about, I find it easier to flip through the book, going from table of contents or the index and then going back to a particular section, or just kind of perusing through the book. I find that very difficult on the Kindle. And then I also find that I have a tendency on the Kindle to over highlight. I'm trying to get better to just kind of highlight a few sentences here and there. Like if I show I read Building a Second Brain on the Kindle, and so you can see I've been trying to just highlight a couple sentences, a couple words or sentences at most when I highlight, but I usually highlight a lot more on the Kindle. So I'm trying to reduce the amount of input into my system. Still testing out whether the physical book or the Kindle is better, but I do like the physical book. Let's see. Simple selection over selection. Yeah, Scott Shepard explained this on his talk with Dan. Recommend watching that one. For a moment, I thought this was the extremely expensive copy of Forgetting Machines. No, this is just a short little book on how memory works and how we select things. Some good tidbits in there. Okay, so this note here that I made about extracting meaning from a minimum amount of information, I tied that to my external mind, the output. So I did a bit of thinking there as I was talking aloud. So I kind of want to capture the essence of that. So when I come back to this, I can remember it for creating a main note. Is that let's see, external minds should house all the information as a means of getting to the fundamental principle or meaning of an idea. That way we can carry the meaning of what we learn around with us. There we go. And there was a note about forgetting curves. I don't have a note about this in my system, so I probably want to just create a index link to this. So if I want to look it up in the future, I have a reference. So I'm just going to add that to my index there and move on. Memory is a creative process. So this is another one where when we create a memory, we are forming those associations, those connections. We aren't just kind of codifying it by itself. We actually have to generate something new in our minds when we do that. So I thought that was interesting. I don't know where I would use this right now, so I think I'll just kind of skip over it. A few comments. Let's see. To me, the purpose is not to highlight interesting thoughts during reading, but rather to capture key ideas, summarize it in keywords to a maximum of 3 sentences. Yeah, to me, the purpose is not to highlight interesting thoughts during reading, but to capture key ideas. Yeah, I struggle with what to highlight a lot of times. Like, I find that I just am overly interested in a lot when I'm being presented with it. So if you looked at, say, some of my earlier highlighting, like I would highlight like whole sections, and then when it came time to actually look through my highlights, it would just be overwhelming to try and process. So I've tried to highlight less. And then also, I wrote an article on Medium recently about using filters for consumption and what you capture. So right now, and part of the reason why in my index card for the book, I will put the goals. So like, what are the questions that I'm trying to keep in mind when reading? So that becomes a lens for what I want to capture. Because otherwise I would just capture so much more of what I was just interested in versus what might be more immediately useful. Usually I write down what it reminds me of reading with connections, the slip box in mind. Yeah. Try doing the bib card to main note process. I'm not sure if you've seen Scott explain this. So yeah, I could show you how I would take something and turn it into a main main note. So let's say, let's take one of these ideas here. So bringing a memory to mind changes it. I talked just about how external mind can be valuable since it provides traceability back to the original source, as well as protects thoughts from drifting over time through immortalizing them. Oh, one interesting thing I'll mention too. When I was having this idea here, I had another thought with how this could be a challenge for your external mind. Where does it make rethinking an idea more difficult? If you are codifying and continually reviewing, say, a certain claim about a topic, does it become harder then to change and update that thinking? I find with the Zettelkasten, perhaps it's easy to add on to ideas, but when you get two ideas that come in conflict, how to handle that. I haven't encountered it yet myself, but it was just an aside that I had from thinking about that one. So if I were to turn this into a main note, what I usually do is I look at that tag here and I will check and see if there are, number one, there's already a main note within my system that is kind of related to that idea, because I don't want to be having the same idea show up multiple times throughout my system. I found when I was using Obsidian that would happen a lot, and then I would kind of diverge my thinking depending on which note I was adding to. So usually the first thing I do is I check the index to see if I already have a note, in which case I'll just kind of build onto that one. So benefits of adopting an output mindset, the generation effect, flexible systems to support changing goals, supports content creation, learning. This one is really, I think, not really related to any of these ideas here. So I think we'll start a new one. And I have a template for my main note. All right, let's check the comments. I can see that you're doing analog Zettelkasten workflow digitally. That's amazing. Yeah, so I'm trying to combine the benefits of both analog and digital in a way that hopefully I get the best of both. So right now, kind of how I approach it is the digital version is where I manage the index and all of the connections between the notes. That way I don't have to be writing the alphanumeric addresses on the index cards. And I find when I'm, the other thing is I'm also using it to develop my idea. I can just kind of write out a whole bunch of thoughts at once in this idea development section. And then once I feel like I have a firm grasp of the core concept, the core idea, then that's when I switch over to the index card and try to just confirm whether or not I can summarize it in one note on the card. So it's kind of development digitally as well as managing links and connections, and then clarifying that I know, confirming that I know what it is the analog session. So my note template looks like this. I'm going to give it a address once I find it where I'm going to put it. I'm going to give it a tag, which I will just currently put the This one, then the context is for why did I use this tag for this note, and then the date is just today. So I have a time dimension of when I created it. And so here, the more we bring an idea to mind, the more it might stray from the original source, or it might change over time. This is why an external mind can be so valuable, because it provides traceability back to the original idea, as well as protects thoughts from drifting over time. So there might be two ideas here. One is traceability, although I don't think that's the one that I want to explore here. It's more about the fidelity of the ideas over time. So let's see here. I think it's a little bit hard to think on camera, because normally I'm just by myself with a little bit of music on and taking my time. But we'll give it a go and see what this looks like. So one of the benefits is sustaining the core concept of an idea over time. So I think this is really beneficial because allows you to not have to redo your thinking. Because sometimes, I think my camera shut off. There we go. Okay, so this allows you to not have to redo your thinking. A lot of times when, if I think about the book that I read here, The Forgetting Machine, when you're recalling an idea, you are essentially recreating that idea over through association. So you're essentially doing the whole development process again every time you bring it to mind. So when you redo that, then that means that you could arrive at a different a different end. You could make a different conclusion to the idea. So an external mind allows you to start at that end and build from it, rather than having to just continuously redo the thinking over again. So I think maybe that's the core idea here. So this allows you to not have to redo your thinking on an idea. You immortalize the core concept so that it is preserved, and when you revisit it, you don't have to recreate it. You can just build upon it, or dispute it as well, taking in that kind of side thought that I had. So now I think that's the core of the idea, and I'm just going to write it out on my index note. The other thing that I find useful about switching from digital to paper is it changes how I think. Right? I'm not thinking with a keyboard, I'm thinking with a pen. Those are two different processes. Also, it slows my mind down. So oftentimes what I find is when I switch over and start writing things out on the note card, I have different ideas come to mind. So let's first, before I write out on the note card, let's see where I'm going to put this one. So external mind benefits. I had a couple other ones here. It's not output changing goals. No. I don't think it's learning, maybe? Maybe that's where I want to first take a look. So if I go to 1B, 510, 1B, 510, 1B. So supports learning, developing an understanding within the context of what we already know, written in your own words, supports regular reviews. Active retrieval, no. But I think learning is a good place to put it. So another thing that I like about the digital is I can kind of get a bird's eye view of my notes as well to see if anywhere else kind of pops up based on where I want to put it. So here's 1B, confirming your understanding. Not content creation. No, I know I have one based on output. Yeah, I think we'll just add it here. I think this is a good spot. Not going to overthink it. Now I just got to get back to my my note here. So we decided that it's going to go 1B3. I got that. So it is going to be 1B4. 5, 5, 10, 1B4. And I'm going to say that in external mind, allows you to preserve your thinking and, more importantly, the conclusions of that thinking. And the conclusions of that thinking over time. And tying it back to the source idea, since biological memory recreates and changes every time you access an external system, prevents any degradation. And then the benefit of this is allows you to build upon thinking that you've already done. This allows you to build upon the thinking you've already done. Okay, so now that is the note. Now I got to title it. So one, I want to be able to get a quick summary idea of what the note is about, and I give myself essentially 6 words to be able to capture the thinking in. So let's see here. This would be external minds preserve thinking. Instead of redoing it. So preserve thinking instead of redoing it. Oh, I think for the purposes of this live stream, I think that is good. All right, so let's see. Is anything going on in the comments while I was face down in my index card? What is the numbering scheme I use? Okay, I can go over that. So essentially, if I think a note is related, like supports or related to an idea, then I move it one level down. So this is demonstrated through the indentation. And then when I do that, I will swap between either alpha or numeric. So 1B1, something that's related to that, becomes 1, or 1B becomes 1B1. And then if something was to be inserted here between these two, more related to this one, then this would be 5, 5, 10, 1B1A. That's currently how I'm doing it. I don't know if I've done enough notes yet to see if there's any drawbacks or negatives to it, but we'll see as I get more and more notes in the system. So if I go back here, so I have this note. I'm going to add my title, preserve thinking instead of redoing it. And then that one's done, so we will just put it behind 1B3. That one's done. And then to tidy it up here on the digital, I will right click, turn this into a page. I'm going to add the number 1B4, and then I will paste this first in the structure where it's going to go, and then also I want to preserve where I got the idea coming from, so I'm going to add it here and then get rid of this tag. So now that is incorporated. So if I go back to, let's say, the forgetting machine, you can see, so if I come back and look at the book, I can see the different notes that I've created from this source. And if I go to this page, I can see where, what helped me get to the idea, what reference note. Oh, and then the one last thing. So I'll tell you why I'm doing this in a second, something I'm testing out. I'll just tidy this up. External mind benefits of, why did I think this note is a benefit, and it's just preserve thinking over time. Okay, so I started doing all this properties, because I find it's a little bit cumbersome, my current process of how like the blocks that I have to move around and stuff. So, and then like adding it to this page, I would really just like to create the note and have it automatically kind of show up in here. So I've been experimenting with using a query to auto pull in these notes. So you can see here, this is the note that I just created, and it's automatically put in relation to the alphanumeric addresses, as well as I can see what tags I gave the note. So just something I'm experimenting with. I'm just trying to remove as much of the friction from the system that I possibly can. So there you go. That is how I made a main note. So I can either do it from here, or from sometimes what I'll have done is I'll have thoughts as I'm writing things out or creating other notes. I used to just put them within the system where I thought they were related to. So if I wanted to turn this into a main note, then I would just put my template right here, fill in all the information to thinking, create my index card, and then just turn it into a page right within the part of the Zettelkasten where I would insert it. But I found that this can get quite chaotic over time, so I've tried putting things behind like this. Just on the daily note, I'll tag it and I'll put the ideas here, just so I'm only presented with that information when I want to look at that specific tag, instead of when I come here, I'm presenting with all the information all at once. Aurelia has joined us. She's currently editing my YouTube videos for me and doing a much better job than I do. So great that you're able to call in. And Ed, there can be advantages to repeated remembrance, sometimes of develop new idea or combination of ideas, but I agree it's important to have a cognitive anchor. Yeah, I think like pretty much every time I revisit something, because you're in a different context, you usually make a different kind of connection to it. And I think it's about getting, rather than having like this ill-formed mud for your ideas that you're trying to add new things onto, once you get like the actual crystallized idea, it becomes much easier to have kind of it as a building block to add new things onto. Regarding my numbering, oh dear, that would confuse me. I'm strict in number and letter. Letter equals insertion, deepening into a note, but not overall thought stream. Number, continuation of a thought stream. Yeah, one thing that I find, and this is something that I struggle with, is I don't get a whole lot of uninterrupted time to kind of work on notes. So I don't really develop like long thought streams of things. I get like, a few minutes here, a few minutes there. Having a young kid and a job, or when my daughter goes to bed at night, I'll get a bit of time to work on things. So I find I develop like ideas kind of one at a time here and there, versus just being able to like put out like say 10 notes in a line. So that's something that I currently struggle with. Excellent. So if anyone wants to see anything else or how I use my system, just let me know in the comments and I can showcase. I was planning on doing about 45 minutes to an hour, and we are at 38. So I'll just continue on with my book for now, and then we will go from there. So this one here was an interesting thing that I learned from this book. So they did this study where they described a car accident to people using different words like, the car bumped, the car crashed into the other car, the car, different kind of adjectives for that. And then they had people watch a video and interpret, like ask them questions like, how fast did you think the car was going? How much damage do you think was done to the car? And depending on the word that they were primed with, crash versus bump, they had different interpretations from the video. So if you heard crash, you thought the car was going a lot faster than if you weren't using that. So I was thinking about this again. I'm because I had those goals on my index card. I'm thinking about things in terms of how does this relate to knowledge development and how we do things. So this is, I think, related to how we word our main notes, like especially how I title them, right? So here I have a few words to convey the idea, and is the words that I use influencing how I interpret that idea later on down the road, or what I think it's about, or what kind of connections I make to that note. So I thought that was interesting, how impactful language and the specific words you use could be. So this one here I'm gonna add to main note titles. So when I'm looking up notes on how I title my main note, this is something that I want to keep in mind down the road. So, see a few more comments. Doing research into cognitive load for my ongoing short-term projects and writing a dissertation thesis for Zettelkasten. My life goal is to transform education in the Netherlands into something optimal. Zettelkasten will be a big part of that. Meant as well to get into university outside of protocol without need for prior diploma. Point being that I'm developing relative long thought streams when it comes to cognitive load, thus related to learning. Yeah, I kind of just jump over around here and there rather than just going particularly deep in one kind of aspect of something. Well, one thing I'll show too, I use the tags plugin for Logseq. So because I am tagging all of these ideas, if I open up my tags pane, I can see all of the tags, and I have them sorted by which ones are my most used. So if I'm coming in to look at some potential ideas to develop, then I can just come here and I can say, okay, main note titles. I actually have 4 notes related to this one. So if I go to that page, then I can see all the notes that I have. A lot of this came from summarization in any subject. That was a good book. That's where I got the idea for the 6-word memoir strategy for kind of summarizing an idea. So one thing that I want to try and do too, that I found in previous iterations of my knowledge development, was I would take a single note from a reference and then I would develop that to a main note, and then it was kind of like a 1-to-1 ratio of reference notes to main notes. And that's where I found a lot of diverging, because different authors have different ideas about things, and I was just kind of preserving their thinking on the subject. Whereas now, because I'm tagging them with what I think they're related to for me, I can kind of aggregate a whole bunch of sources around a particular topic, and then that way I can play around with the ideas and develop my own thinking on it, and that's what I create the main note for. So how many megabytes of information does our brains actually store? It was surprisingly little. I think it was something like in terms of actual information, like 125 megabytes or something, because we reduce it down to the minimum amount of information. Not probably something that I'm going to use, but I thought was interesting when I was reading it. And so this is another example too of how I am filtering out things at every stage of the process, rather than thinking, well, one, that I have to take everything from the book and turn it into main notes. Definitely don't want to do that. I've overwhelmed so many systems before with that. And then once I get here, just because I took a note on it on the index card doesn't mean that I necessarily am going to tag it with something, but I still have it here in case my thoughts change in the future. And then not everything that gets tagged is going to be immediately turned into a main note. So I have these kind of systems built up that are going to continuously filter out the things that make it to the top level to turn it into main notes, because I just want to kind of capture the most meaningful things at a time. This one, inferences how alphanumeric storage structure for main notes provides context so that we can get right to the core of an idea. No note can be truly understood in isolation. Either your mind needs to supply the context or the system can prime you for it. So yeah, this was an idea that I wrote out actually on my note card as I was reading. So sometimes like you read something and it just triggers a thought in your head. So I actually wrote out kind of like a literature note, I guess you would call it, but like my own idea, insight, rather than just kind of capturing what the book was saying. Because what I find sometimes happens is if I just take, say, the example of here, how personal knowledge management supports learning, I put this note preserve thinking instead of redoing it. Because this note is captured within this structure, and it's providing context for that note. So I can shorten the idea down to its essence instead of having to kind of say, external minds or PKM, talking about learning. I can add so much more just by where I store it. So that one, I probably want to add the value of note hierarchy to that one. Excellent. Verbal adhesion is a term, so it's essentially memory without comprehension. I think they were talking about like different memory techniques, like say method of loci, where you think of like your house and you put different objects in different locations. And there was even some like people who had these really good memories. They could like remember like tens of thousands of words, but they couldn't understand what they meant, so they were storing information rather than comprehending it. And that got me thinking about how that's something we want to avoid in knowledge development. We just don't want to recall all the information that we have. We want to get to the root of what it means. We want to have actual comprehensions. So we need to strive to understand them well enough to use the knowledge that they contain. So what matters most is not the number of notes you have, but how deeply you know them. So you could probably tell from my main note process that each note probably takes me, if it wasn't being on camera here, it'd probably be taking me say 15 minutes, 20 minutes to use. And that's because I'm not going for how many, but I really want to know the ones that I'm developing. So let's see, anything else in the comments before we kind of start cluing it up? here. I develop my own thinking most of the time. My main notes are written in context of my thoughts. In other words, I don't just copy what I'm saying, rather I include it in my notes. Yeah, I used to just kind of summarize the author's ideas, like I said, but now I'm getting a lot more to the point where it's just my own thinking. And I think that's where, when you first start out, you kind of rely a lot on external sources, but as you kind of develop a bit more confidence in your idea, and you kind of get like a framework of more context, then you can more easily build out your own thoughts versus just having to rely on having to have a source in order to have them. Thought streams. The cube timer, yeah, I started using that for doing work sessions. I find it useful. I found that there's too much friction with like saying using like a Pomodoro timer on my computer. That is very easy and a good reminder to do some work. Ed says, I'd be curious to see your notes on how creators maximize complexity to generate complexity. Oh, I think you saw this here. Influencers showcase complexity for content potential. Yeah, so this one, I was thinking, so this is another thing that I turned into an article on are we over designing our knowledge development workflows. And so I found that I did that a lot because of watching a lot of YouTube videos and whatnot, and you just see all this complexity out there, and you end up over designing things. And then I asked myself the question, like, okay, well, why do we? Camera keeps going off, but why do we do that? Like, what's the reason? One reason I thought was, okay, we have an aversion to chaos within our personal understanding development systems. And then another reason I thought was that, and something that I found too, is you have this need to kind of just keep creating content, and if it's just simple things that you're showing, it's kind of hard to keep making content on something that's simple, just making the same thing over and over again. So sometimes I think there might be a sense that content creators, influencers, end up showcasing more complexity just so they have more content to create to kind of keep up with the rat race. And then so this is 5.10.1c3. 5.10.1c3. We mimic the over-designed systems of thought leaders. However, there's a tendency for them to over-design because such systems give them more potential things to create content about. And then that followed how I think there's an opportunity for thought leaders to really raise awareness around these barriers to adopting personal knowledge management systems. So rather than showing everything that you can do, that we can show where things can go wrong so that we can keep people using these kind of systems for longer. So I think that's what you were looking for, Ed. Hi Nigel. Yeah, more context, more thinking. August Bradley's Pillars, Pipes, and Vaults gives me a migraine. I think I briefly read that one before. It sounds familiar. I swear by PPV for productivity, not knowledge, though. Right? Nigel says, do I use graphs? I do not. And if you want to find out more about why I don't, I have another Medium article about that. So if I look at my index, this is another thing too that I've found. as your number of notes grows, when you only have a few, it becomes very easy to kind of navigate just by looking at the titles of notes. But I know that I have a note around graphs in here somewhere. Actually, I just found it here. Graph views distract from thinking development. But if I wanted to actually start navigating through, I would come to my index, and I know that I talked about it as being a challenge, perhaps? No, that isn't where I put it. So this is where you kind of gotta recreate some of that thinking, especially as your knowledge grows. And the better I get at capturing the context. Yeah, see, this was an old note. I didn't put in those index notes to make it more discoverable. So you can see here, this is an example of an old style note that I created. But if you look for me on Medium, I have a article on the seductive power of knowledge graphs, which covers why I don't use it. So I think that's good. We went for 55 minutes. My voice is starting to get a bit sore, and my camera's about to die. So, thanks everyone for watching. Hopefully you were able to take something useful or interesting away from this session. It was actually pretty fun. I'm gonna have to think about my setup because I kind of have my chat hidden behind my mic, which makes it hard to see. But yeah, thanks everyone for watching, and let me know down in the comments below or on Twitter if you would like me to continue doing these. I can do these more often, and I will see you all next time.